the screen is black. A faint sound of distant, muffled crying drifts in, then silence. A single voice speaks, low, calm, but carrying a weight that presses into the listener's bones. They told her she was a daughter, but they dressed her like a wife. They told her she was a child, but taught her how to obey like a spouse. And the cruelest part, she believed them. Because when the lie is fed to you before you can speak, you mistake the cage for the world itself. Your breathing slows. You feel the tension behind those words, the heaviness of something older than any single person's pain. This is not just one woman's story. It is the story of roles forced upon the powerless, roles designed to bind the mind, not just the body. In small villages and wealthy estates, in temples and hidden chambers, in the corners of families that looked perfect from the outside, the same ritual unfolded. A girl, told who she is before she knows herself. And the role was not her own choosing. The ancient world had a way of sealing such fates without ever raising a sword. Contracts written in whispers, doors hidden in blessings, customs dressed as holiness. And in those spaces fathers could become husbands in all but name. If you think this is only a thing of the past, if you think the modern world has erased the altar where innocence is traded for power, you are already asleep. Because the systems that once trapped girls in forbidden roles have not vanished. They've become smarter, more invisible. They have learned to hide behind polite language, legal loopholes, and cultural silence. The question is not whether this story happened. It's whether you're willing to see how it still happens. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. They will tell you it was tradition. They will tell you it was culture. They will even tell you it was love. But tradition is the word used when the crime is too old to prosecute. Culture is the word used when the abuse is too common to name. And love is the word they twist when they need the prison to feel like a home. In certain corners of history, ones the official records would prefer you never study, the boundaries between daughter and wife were not lines, but shadows. A father could choose her clothing, her words, her movements, and eventually, even her future bed. The shift was slow, almost imperceptible. First, she was told she must honor him. Then, she must serve him. And eventually, she must belong to him in ways unspoken yet universally understood. This was not random depravity. It was engineered. A system that required the powerless to never realize their power. If you can mold a girl into the role of the obedient spouse while she still believes in fairy tales, she will never learn to write her own story. And here's the deeper truth. This wasn't just about lust or ownership. It was about control. Entire lineages, wealth transfers, and political alliances were cemented through these silent arrangements. A man could secure loyalty for life, not through love, but through erasing the very idea that another life was possible. The institutions that allowed this, be they religious, legal, or social, understood something most people still don't grasp. If you can convince someone that their cage is sacred, they will guard it themselves. That's why the records are scarce. That's why the language is vague. That's why entire centuries pass before anyone dares to speak the truth plainly. And while the clothing, the titles, and the rituals may look different now, the blueprint has not changed. The modern world dresses the same arrangement in softer colors, cleaner words, and legal documents written in a language you're not meant to understand. The role is still assigned before the person is fully formed, and the chains are no less real. They're simply invisible. You must understand, no cage, no matter how gilded, holds forever unless the prisoner learns to love the bars. The architects of these roles knew that a chain around the ankle was crude, obvious. Anyone could see it. But a chain around the mind, that was eternal. It began with language. The words, duty, and honor, were whispered into the girl's ears long before she knew the meaning of freedom. She was told that sacrifice was holy, that obedience was her crown, that silence was a sign of wisdom. The stories she heard as a child were never neutral. They were blueprints. Each fairy tale replaced the word, love, with obedience, until she could no longer tell them apart. And here lies the most sinister brilliance. The captor didn't need to hide his power. He only needed to hide her alternatives. If she never knew another way to live, her cage would feel like the horizon. The rituals reinforced it. He became her teacher, her confessor, her protector, each role making the other impossible to question. If she disobeyed, the shame was hers to bear. If she complied, the reward was his approval. His smile a smile that carried the weight of her entire world. Slowly, she was trained to defend him against anyone who questioned the arrangement. The same way a soldier defends his commander. The same way a believer defends their God. You might think this is monstrous, and it is. But here's the dangerous truth: the human mind can adapt to anything if it must. In fact, it will justify the very thing that destroys it, simply to survive. That's why centuries of this practice went unchallenged. That's why the daughters in these roles often spoke of their fathers with reverence, even as their lives were consumed by him. Not because they were blind, but because they were trained to see through his eyes. And once you can make someone see the world only through your vision, you own them. It is tempting to believe this kind of corruption thrived only in dark corners, far from the eyes of the righteous. But the truth is far more unsettling. The eyes of the righteous saw everything. Villages knew, churches knew, courts knew, and they did nothing, not because they didn't care, but because they cared about something else more. Order, reputation. The smooth running of a system that fed them all. You see, once a community benefits from a crime, the crime stops being a crime. It becomes a custom. The baker still sells bread to the man who owns his daughter. The priest still blesses the union that's not a union. The magistrate still turns his gaze to the next case, because the one before him was family business. There is no scandal when everyone is complicit. Religious leaders wrapped it in scripture. Honor thy father was wielded like a blade. The word submission was recited as if it had been carved into the bones of the earth. And when the girl wept, her tears were called rebellion. Her silence, obedience, holiness. The law was worse. Not only did it refuse to intervene, in many places it codified the arrangement. Marriageable age was a number chosen not for morality, but for convenience. Property laws were written so that a daughter's body was as much an asset as her dowry. And here's the most chilling part: the records that survive are the polished ones. The legal contracts, the dowry agreements, the letters of consent. These are the sanitized artifacts. They don't tell you what happened in the rooms where there were no scribes, no signatures, no witnesses except the two people whose roles were already decided. The silence was never accidental. It was protection, not for the girl, but for the men who profited from her fate. And even today, silence is the most powerful weapon. It doesn't just erase the victim's voice, it erases the possibility that her story was ever real. The system knows if there is no record, there is no proof. If there is no proof, there is no crime. Power rarely survives on ideology alone. Behind every sacred tradition, every moral custom, there is an economy, and this one was no different. A daughter's role, when bound to her father in ways that blurred the lines of blood and marriage, was more than just personal control. It was an asset. She was a vessel for alliances, a currency for debts, a guarantee that wealth stayed in the hands of the same men generation after generation. If a father could bypass the market of suitors entirely, if he could keep her within his own household, he could keep everything that came with her: land, labor, inheritance, influence. Understand this: in certain centuries, women were the primary channels through which property and prestige moved. To lose a daughter to another man was to lose the means to shape an empire. So, the forbidden role became a solution, a way to ensure nothing left the grasp of the patriarch. And the institutions, legal, religious, even medical, supported this because they benefited too. The church collected offerings from the family. The courts avoided disputes by keeping property within a single lineage. Even physicians wrote reports that pathologized any woman who resisted, calling her unstable, hysterical, unfit to choose her own fate. The most insidious part: these arrangements were often dressed in the language of protection. The man claimed he was shielding her from an unworthy world, from predators, from scandal. But in reality, he was ensuring that he remained the sole gatekeeper of her value, and when the arrangement was questioned, he could lean on an entire network of power to defend it. Judges ruled in his favor. Priests declared it righteous. Neighbors whispered about the girl's duty rather than his crime. It was not just corruption, it was a closed-loop system. The victim was both the resource and the prisoner. The abuser was both the ruler and the guardian. And when an entire economy feeds on the subjugation of the powerless, the practice doesn't just persist, it evolves. Because once money and control become intertwined, morality is no longer even part of the conversation. A system this old cannot survive on brute force alone. It survives because it becomes hereditary. The girl raised in the forbidden role learns to speak a certain way, move a certain way, think a certain way. And when she has daughters of her own, if she is ever allowed to, she teaches them the same patterns. Not because she is cruel, but because she has been convinced this is survival. That is the genius of generational conditioning. The victim becomes the messenger. In the small, hidden corners of family life, she repeats the rituals without even realizing what she's doing. She teaches her daughters that a man's comfort is worth more than her own boundaries. That a woman's silence is her greatest weapon. That resistance is dangerous and acceptance is holy. Over time, the role no longer feels imposed, it feels inherited. And once something feels inherited, it is almost impossible to question without tearing apart your own identity. This is how the cycle protects itself. The father may die, but the structure he built survives in the minds of those he controlled. It passes from generation to generation, carried like a family heirloom wrapped in shame and loyalty. And here's the part most people refuse to see in these families. Love and fear are the same thing. The daughters love the men who confine them, because love is the only acceptable emotion allowed. Fear is disguised as loyalty. Pain is disguised as duty. By the time an outsider glimpses the truth, the entire household is already defending it. The father says nothing is wrong. The mother says nothing is wrong. Even the daughter will say nothing is wrong, because to admit otherwise would destroy the story she's been told her entire life. This is why these roles last centuries. This is why they survive revolutions, wars, and regime changes. You can overthrow a government in a year, but you cannot overthrow a mindset in a generation. The greatest cages are not made of iron. They are made of memory. The mind does not need chains when it has boundaries it dares not cross. That is the perfection of psychological control. The victim becomes their own warden. From the moment she could understand words, the girl was taught the limits of her world. Not through outright threats. Those are too obvious, too easy to resist. But through subtle, repeated patterns. A look of disappointment when she spoke out of turn. A withheld embrace when she questioned authority. A small reward when she complied without hesitation. These micro-adjustments became her reality. She learned that comfort came only through obedience. That approval came only through stillness. That love came only when she stayed within the lines drawn for her. And here's where the system becomes almost unbreakable. It convinces her that stepping outside those lines is not only dangerous, it is immoral. That to seek her own will is to betray the very people she has been taught to protect. Over time, she does not just accept the role, she identifies with it. Her value is measured by how well she fits it. Her worth is tied to how quietly she carries it. Even her private thoughts begin to censor themselves, as if her mind has been fitted with its own surveillance system. The brilliance of this design is that it removes the need for constant enforcement. She polices herself. She silences herself. She builds the walls higher, tighter, stronger, all while believing she is doing it for her own good. This is why escape is so rare. The prison is not in the house. The prison is in the mind. And when you try to free someone who has been conditioned like this, they will resist you. Not because they love their captor, but because they fear the vast, unknown space that exists beyond the cage. True control is not about physical possession. It is about owning the part of someone that no one else can see. Their thoughts, their identity, their definition of self. Once you hold that, you don't need to hold anything else. The danger didn't end when the world began calling itself civilized. It just became harder to spot. When revolutions came, when laws changed, when the language of rights and freedom began to seep into the public mind, the old systems didn't vanish. They adapted. The explicit contracts turned into unspoken agreements. The visible cages turned into invisible expectations. The patriarch no longer declared ownership in the open. He simply engineered dependence so complete that leaving was unthinkable. In the modernized form, the forbidden role was not always physical confinement. Sometimes it was financial. Sometimes it was social. Sometimes it was emotional. But always, it was binding. The language shifted too. No more sermons about female obedience carved in stone. Instead, you heard phrases like, "It's just how things are," or "It's for her own good." The tone softened, but the meaning stayed the same. She belongs where we put her. Even institutions that claimed to fight for liberation became complicit. Schools taught history without mentioning the roles women had been trapped in for centuries. Courts handed down rulings that still favored the stability of the family over the autonomy of the individual. And the media, it perfected the art of disguise. On the surface, stories celebrated independent women, but the scripts underneath still rewarded them for choosing service over self, silence over confrontation, beauty over autonomy. The genius of the modern system is this: you can stand in the middle of a city, in the 21st century, surrounded by rights and freedoms, and still be living in the same role that existed in the shadowed halls of a 14th century manor. Only now, the cage is harder to see, and harder to prove, because a prison with no walls has no doors to break down. It can last a lifetime without anyone realizing the sentence was ever handed down. Control lasts longer when it feels like destiny. And to make it feel like destiny, you don't need chains, you need stories. The architects of the forbidden role understood something ancient humans are ruled by symbols. Give a man a sword, and he will fight for you. Give him a flag, and he will die for you. The same law applies to the mind of a woman, but instead of a flag, you give her an archetype. So they gave her the saint, the virgin, the loyal wife, the selfless daughter, and they wrapped each in shining robes of virtue so that resisting them felt like heresy. The saint suffers in silence, and this is called holiness. The virgin sacrifices desire, and this is called purity. The loyal wife forgives betrayal, and this is called love. The obedient daughter obeys against her will, and this is called honor. Each role was a story passed down through lullabies, ballads, and scripture. Each one taught her that her suffering was not only normal, it was sacred. The most dangerous part, these symbols were beautiful. They were crafted to inspire devotion, not disgust. No one ever forced her to kneel, she knelt willingly, believing it made her worthy. Even when the modern world arrived, the symbols remained, only now they appeared in films, novels, and advertisements. The perfect daughter caring for her aging father without question. The bride who gives up her ambitions to stand by her man. The girl who refuses to speak against her family even when they destroy her life. The script is always the same. Her worth is measured by what she gives up. And the audience is trained to applaud her for it. This is the trap. The moment you make captivity look like courage, the prisoner will defend it with her life. Because how do you fight something you've been told is beautiful? How do you reject a role you've been told is holy? You don't. You carry it, and you pass it on. By now, you have walked through shadows older than your own name. You have seen how the forbidden role was built, inherited, and disguised. And perhaps you've begun to wonder why this matters to you. Here is the answer, because you live inside a world still built from the same blueprint. It may not be a daughter trapped in her father's house that you see in front of you. It may be a wife who can't speak without her husband's permission. It may be a sister who defends her abuser because the family told her to. Keep the peace. It may be you, looking at the walls of your own life, realizing they are not yours at all. Once you recognize the pattern, it's like seeing the faint outline of a predator in the dark. You can no longer pretend it's not there. But recognition is dangerous. Because the moment you see the bars, you are faced with a choice. Remain inside and call it safety. Or step out and face the world they told you was too dangerous to survive. This is where the transformation begins. And if you've come this far with me, I want you to prove something, not to me, but to yourself. Right now in the comments write the words, I see the cage. Write it twice. Once for the person you've been, and once for the person you will become. Do this, and you are marking the moment. You are telling the algorithm, yes, but more importantly, you are telling your own mind that you will not unsee what has been shown to you. The old system survives because people keep its secrets. The new man survives because he refuses to. And you, watching this, still here, have just stepped into a very dangerous kind of awareness. One that cannot be reversed. From here on, we go deeper. The history will get darker, and the truth's far more personal. The most dangerous lies are not shouted. They are whispered in the language of morality. For centuries, the forbidden role survived not just through silence and force, but through blessing. Entire cultures wrapped the arrangement in sacred words so that questioning it felt like blasphemy. Religious texts were quoted selectively, wielded like weapons. Verses about obedience and submission were repeated until they became mantras, etched into the bones of the people. Entire sermons were built around the idea that God's order placed women under the authority of men, and that to challenge this was to challenge the divine itself. But here's what they never said out loud. If the divine truly required obedience from the powerless, it would not need men to enforce it. Still, the message was clear. The daughter who served her father was righteous. The woman who endured her husband's dominance was holy, and any deviation from that order was labeled sin, rebellion, corruption of the soul. The brilliance of this design was that it turned morality into a shield for abuse. You couldn't just accuse the man. You would have to accuse the system, the faith, the community. And very few dared. Even outside religion, morality was weaponized. Secular societies spoke of family honor, respect for elders, the natural order of things, all of it built on the same premise. Those born into lesser roles must stay there for the greater good. What they never admit, what they cannot admit, is that this greater good always serves the powerful first. And once morality is fused with power, the victim is trapped in a double cage, the physical one and the spiritual one. Break the first, and you may still carry the second inside you for life, because even if you escape, the guilt they planted in you will follow you like a shadow. This is why so many never leave. It's not just fear of punishment, it's fear of being wrong, fear of being the villain in the very story they've been told since birth. That fear is no accident. It is the final lock on the door. Every prison has guards. In this one, they aren't men with weapons. They are the people you'd expect to help. The forbidden role could never survive without enablers. These are the mothers who tell their daughters to just endure, because they endured. The aunts who say, don't make a scene. The brothers who know but stay silent to keep the family's name clean. Then there are the neighbors who look away. The friends who change the subject. The elders who call it tradition and dismiss it with a wave of the hand. They know. They've always known. The system relies on them. Because for every abuser, there must be a circle of silence keeping him safe. And these enablers tell themselves they're doing the right thing. That they're preserving the family, protecting the community, avoiding shame. But the truth is simpler, uglier. They are protecting themselves from discomfort. They are keeping their own lives smooth at the expense of someone else's freedom. What makes them so dangerous is that they don't look like villains. They smile in public, bring food to the house, speak kindly at gatherings. They can convince outsiders that everything is fine, because they've been convincing themselves of the same lie for years. And when the victim tries to speak, these are the first to step in. Don't exaggerate. You're imagining things. Think of how this will make your father look. It is not just the abuser who holds the key to the cage. The enablers each hold one, two, and they all agree never to use it. And here's the most chilling part: without these people, the abuser would be powerless. It is the network that makes the system strong. One man can be confronted, but an entire community bound together by shared denial? That is nearly unbreakable. This is why exposure is so dangerous. Once you name the truth, you are not just accusing one man. You are accusing everyone who kept his secret. And they will unite against you faster than he ever could alone. Because when silence becomes tradition, breaking it is treated as treason. The most effective control is not enforced with grand displays of power. It is slipped into the mundane, woven into daily rituals so ordinary they become invisible. In households where the forbidden role thrived, the training began with habits so small they barely registered. She served his meals first, even when she was hungry. She asked permission to leave the room, even in her own home. She rose when he entered, sat when he gestured, waited for his approval before speaking in front of others. None of these acts looked like abuse in isolation. That was the genius of it: one plate of food, one nod of permission, one moment of silence. But repeat them 1,000 times over years, and they shape a mind as surely as water shapes stone. These rituals became the rhythm of her life. They taught her without words that his comfort came before hers, his voice before hers, his will above hers. And because it was done every day, it didn't feel like a command. It felt like the way things are. Special occasions reinforced it. At gatherings, she was praised for her grace, her modesty, her ability to serve with joy. Relatives smiled at her obedience as though it were a natural talent, not a learned survival tactic. And she learned quickly compliance earned applause. Resistance earned shame. Even celebrations carried the same message. Birthdays were marked by gifts chosen by him, not her. Milestones were praised only if they reflected his guidance. The rituals of joy were still rooted in his control. By embedding domination in daily life, the system ensured that the role didn't just happen to her, it happened through her. She began to anticipate his needs before he spoke them. She learned to erase parts of herself before they could cause conflict. This is why outsiders often failed to see the abuse. They looked for chains and punishments, for shouting and threats. But the real prison was made of small, quiet gestures, repeated until they felt like breathing. And once control feels like breathing, you don't notice you're suffocating. There is a point in every captivity where escape is no longer about the body. It is about the mind. The chains have been internalized. The voice of the captor has become her own. By now, years of conditioning have done their work. The girl no longer asks, "What do I want?" She asks, "What would please him?" Her choices are filtered through his preferences. Her instincts have been replaced with rehearsed obedience. The cruelest trick is that this transformation feels, to her, like growth. She tells herself she has become calmer, wiser, more disciplined. She speaks proudly of her ability to Keep the peace. 2. Manage his moods. To know her place. The language of her captivity has been rewritten as virtue. This is the point of no return, not because escape is physically impossible, but because the urge to escape has been dissolved. It's here that outsiders fail her most. When they finally see her situation and whisper, "Why doesn't she just leave?" they miss the truth she has left. Her old self, her old desires, her old instincts, all abandoned long ago. What remains is a woman who believes her identity is defined by the very role that destroyed it. Even if the door swings open, she hesitates. Freedom feels alien, like a language she's forgotten. Without the structure of his rules, the world feels chaotic, unsafe. She may even return to him willingly, not because she loves him, but because the cage feels like home. This is why such systems endure for generations. The control does not merely trap the victim, it recreates them. And when they are reshaped enough, the next girl inherits not just the rules, but the belief that the rules are right. By the time the point of no return is reached, the forbidden role no longer needs to be enforced from the outside. It lives inside her now, and it whispers to her in a voice she believes is her own. The tragedy is that captivity doesn't end when the captor dies or disappears. It survives in the hands of those who were once its victims. Now rebranded as custodians of tradition, the girl, now grown into a woman, carries the rules inside her like sacred scripture. And when she has daughters, nieces, or young girls in her care, she does not see herself as a jailer. She sees herself as a teacher. She passes down the wisdom that was beaten into her. Don't speak unless spoken to. Learn to serve without complaint. Sacrifice your comfort for the family's honor. Silence is safer than truth. To her, these are survival lessons, not chains. She believes she is protecting the next generation from the wrath she once endured. But protection becomes indoctrination. The girls learn these rules before they learn themselves. The captor no longer needs to exist for the control to continue. The structure is now maintained by those it once oppressed. The cell is rebuilt, in each generation, brick, by loving hands that think they're keeping danger out, not realizing they're sealing the danger in. What's most insidious is that the cycle doesn't always require cruelty. In fact, it often thrives in kindness. A mother cooks a meal just the way he liked it, not because she fears punishment, but because it feels right. A grandmother corrects a granddaughter's disrespectful tone, believing she's saving her from a future of trouble. The bars are painted with good intentions, and that makes them even harder to see. By now, the system is a self-policing organism. The young are shaped by the old were shaped by someone before them, and the original wound is lost in the haze of time. All that remains is the shape of the cage, and the conviction that it is the proper shape of a life. The forbidden role is no longer given. It is inherited. And inheritance, unlike captivity, comes wrapped in pride. It begins quietly. A question slips out where there should have been silence. A girl, perhaps 13, perhaps younger, dares to ask her mother, "Why do we do it this way?" The room stills, the air thickens. It is the kind of question that does not require an answer, only a reaction. And the reaction is swift. A look sharp enough to cut replaces the warmth in her mother's eyes. The words come like a verdict, because that's how it's always been. But the question lingers. It itches at the mind like a grain of sand under the skin. The girl notices more. The way laughter stops when the patriarch enters. The way her aunt hides the bruises under long sleeves in summer. The way her older cousin never got to choose her husband. The forbidden thought blooms, what if they're wrong? At first, the discovery feels electric, thrilling, dangerous, alive. But freedom's first spark is always met with the cold bucket of tradition. Her mother warns her to stop asking questions, whispers that rebellion will get you hurt. Her grandmother shakes her head, muttering about girls who don't learn their place. The walls of the cage respond like a living thing. The moment she pushes, they press back harder. Punishments grow sharper. The affection she once received curdles into suspicion. She's watched more closely. Her movements, her friendships, her speech, all are measured. In private, she begins keeping a secret journal. It's the first thing she owns that no one else shapes. Its pages are filled with impossible dreams, walking alone through a city, choosing her own clothes, saying no without consequence. This is the point where the cycle could break, where rebellion could become escape. But this is also the point where most break themselves. The pressure is too much. The price is too high. Those who persist must accept exile, from family, from tradition, from the only life they've ever known. And exile, in its own way, is another kind of cage. She has a choice: survive in captivity or survive alone. Leaving is never as cinematic as the stories promise. There is no triumphant music, no wind carrying you toward a brighter horizon. It is a kitchen door creaking at 3 a.m., a bag packed so lightly it feels like you're forgetting something vital, the muffled sound of someone shifting in their sleep as you slip past them for the last time. The girl, now older, harder, walks out into the darkness with nothing but a few crumpled bills, a secondhand coat, and the gnawing certainty that if she stays, she will not survive. Not in the ways that matter. The first hours feel like breathing for the first time. The air tastes different. The world feels too big. She almost laughs at the absurdity of streetlights, strangers, and the sound of a train in the distance. Things that existed her whole life but never belonged to her. But reality catches up quickly. Freedom has teeth. Without family, there is no safety net. Without tradition, there is no identity to hide behind. She learns the weight of doors that lock from the outside, the sting of being called ungrateful, lost, corrupted, by those she once loved. The loneliness is brutal. In the cage, at least you belong to someone. Out here, you belong to no one, and no one belongs to you. The people she meets are kind in passing, but they have their own lives, their own families, their own cages to maintain. Money runs out. Nights get colder. The freedom she fought for begins to feel like a punishment. She wonders if the elders were right. If survival always demands a cage of some kind, and yet, there's something inside her now that will not bend back into place. Even on the worst days, she can walk where she wants. She can speak without permission. She can exist without fear that every choice will be measured against ancient rules. Freedom may be a lonely road, but it is hers alone to walk. And sometimes, when she sees another girl looking through the bars, eyes wide with questions, she recognizes herself. And she knows if she survives long enough, she will be the one holding the map out of the cage. Years pass. The girl who left becomes a woman who carries her freedom like an old scar, not painful anymore, but never quite invisible. The cage she escaped is still there, still intact, still holding the daughters of those who once whispered her name like a curse. But time has a way of bending the unbendable. A rumor spreads among the younger ones: she left, and she lived. One day, a letter arrives. It's from a girl she's never met, a cousin, maybe, or just another child caught in the web of the same rules. The handwriting is careful, the words trembling. I don't know if you remember me, but I remember you. I want to leave too. How did you do it? The woman sits with the letter for a long time. Her hands shake, not from fear, but from the knowledge that this is how cycles begin to crack. Not with a revolution, but with a single outstretched hand, offered in the quiet. She writes back. She doesn't sugarcoat the truth. You will be cold. You will be hungry. You will cry yourself to sleep more nights than you can count. But one day, you'll wake up and realize the air you breathe is yours, the choices you make are yours, the life you live is yours. And no one, no cage, no tradition, no name can take that from you. The letter is sent. Weeks later, another arrives, then another. Slowly, a network grows. Scattered girls and women tracing her footsteps in the dark, finding each other, building something that looks suspiciously like a family. But one chosen, not forced. The elders whisper about the change, the way obedience is slipping through their fingers. They call her dangerous. A threat? She smiles. Because she knows they're right. And somewhere, in a kitchen at 3 a.m., another door creaks open.